I want to start by taking you into a room, and I want you to really picture this. It is the year 1862.
Right.
We're in the White House, but, and this is key, it's not the bustling power center version you might imagine from the movies or, textbooks.
No, it's much darker than that.
Much darker. It is a Tuesday, late afternoon. The heavy velvet curtains are drawn completely tight against the sun. The air is stale. It smells faintly of sickness and old tobacco. And right in the center of the room, there's a large bed.
It genuinely sounds like a scene from a Gothic novel.
It really feels like one, because in that bed lies a man who simply cannot get up. He isn't sleeping. He is just staring at the ceiling, essentially catatonic.
He's entirely paralyzed.
Right, and he refuses to eat. It gets so incredibly bad that when his family brings him a tray of food, they check it first. They actually stop bringing him silverware.
Because they're genuinely afraid he might use the knife on himself.
Exactly. They are terrified that the President of the United States is going to commit suicide right there in the executive mansion.
And if you look at the historical context, I mean, you can't really blame the guy.
You really can't. His beloved son, Willie, has just died of typhoid fever, a grief that is literally driving him mad. His wife is down the hall, screaming in her own hysteria. And outside the window, the country is quite literally breaking in half.
The Civil War is going incredibly badly at this point.
Catastrophically. The Union armies are being humiliated on the battlefield. The press routinely calls him a baboon. His own cabinet thinks he's incompetent, and he feels personally that the death of the entire nation is his fault.
He is completely and utterly lost.
And yet, we aren't talking about a forgotten, failed figure who crumbled under pressure. We are talking about Abraham Lincoln.
The man on the penny, the granite statue, the literal pillar of American strength.
It is incredibly jarring. We have this tendency to view historical greats as monolithic. We think of Lincoln as this stoic, unshakable figure of certainty,
Right, we strip away their humanity to make them monuments. But the reality is that in 1862, he was a man completely lost in the woods, suffering from what we now diagnose as severe clinical depression.
Or what they called melancholia back then.
Exactly, and that dissonance between the great man myth and the paralyzed man in the bed is exactly where we are living today. Because the core theme of this deep dive is feeling lost.
And that's a state that every single person listening has felt, is currently feeling, or absolutely will feel at some point.
But we usually treat it as a malfunction, don't we? We treat feeling lost like a virus, something to be cured immediately so you can get back to being productive.
Oh, 100%. If you're lost, you're failing. That's the modern narrative. If you don't have a 5-year plan, or if you stray from your path, you're just wasting time.
But looking at the massive stack of research we have today, biographies, psychological case studies on Lincoln, Carl Jung, Teddy Roosevelt, Buzz Aldrin, and Charles Darwin, a totally different picture emerges.
A completely different picture. And the mission of this deep dive is to explore the argument that feeling lost isn't a bug in the human system. It's a feature.
It is a necessary, and I would argue crucial, mechanism for psychological transformation.
It's the void before creation.
Precisely. Sometimes you aren't just off the path. Sometimes, like a child taking one wrong turn, you just need to backtrack. But other times, the feeling of being lost is actually the sound of an old identity dying so a new one can be born.
It's tectonic plates shifting. It's violent, it hurts, but it's how mountains are made.
I love that analogy. It perfectly captures the necessity of the destruction.
So we have a roadmap for this dive. We're going to look at 4 distinct flavors of being lost, because they aren't all the exact same experience.
Right. They manifest very differently depending on the individual and the circumstance.
We've got the creative madness of reinvention, the comparison trap of external validation, the burden of the peak, and finally the paradox of choice.
We are covering the absolute full spectrum of the existential crisis here, from the deeply spiritual to the purely biological.
Let's jump right into the first one. This is the story that surprised me the most when I was going through the sources. I obviously knew about Carl Jung as the dream guy, the archetypes guy.
Collective unconscious.
Right. But I did not know about the breakup.
Oh, the great schism. You really cannot understand modern psychology without understanding this friendship and its total catastrophic collapse.
So set the stage for us. It's 1909. Where exactly does Carl Jung sit in the world?
In 1909, Carl Jung is essentially the crown prince of the intellectual world. He is young, he's brilliant, and he has been explicitly anointed by the king himself, Sigmund Freud.
And you have to understand, at this specific time, Freud isn't just a prominent doctor. He is the center of the intellectual universe.
He has literally created psychoanalysis. It is his kingdom.
And Jung is the heir apparent.
Explicitly so. They were incredibly close. Freud actually called Jung his adopted son. He genuinely believed Jung was the only one capable of carrying the torch of psychoanalysis into the future.
Why Jung specifically?
Well, there were political reasons. Freud was worried psychoanalysis would be dismissed as a, quote, Jewish science in a very anti-Semitic Europe. Jung wasn't Jewish. Freud needed Jung to legitimize the movement globally. Jung's entire future was mapped out. He was going to inherit the throne.
But there's a friction there, right? A massive intellectual wedge that starts forming.
Deeply personal and intellectual friction. Freud was obsessed, and I mean rigidly obsessed with the idea that everything, art, religion, anxiety, your fear of spiders, stemmed from repressed sexual trauma. Libido was the only engine.
And Jung just didn't buy it.
He couldn't. He thought the human psyche was so much bigger than just sex. He was interested in spirituality, in mythology, and the universal symbols we all share.
But you don't say no to Freud.
You absolutely do not. Freud was a tyrant about his theories. He demanded total, unquestioning loyalty. If you disagreed, you were an enemy.
So for years, Jung is just biting his tongue.
He's suppressing his own genius to be the good son. He later wrote, I was doubting all along the line, but he stayed quiet to keep the peace.
He was trading his authenticity for security.
Which is a remarkably common way to get lost, actually. You stay on a path that isn't yours because the path is safe. You have prestige, you have a community.
Until 1913, the dam finally breaks.
Jung publishes Symbols of Transformation. It's a dense academic book, but the subtext was basically a declaration of war.
He publicly challenged Freud's core dogmas.
And the reaction was nuclear. Freud didn't just politely disagree in a journal. He erased him. He excommunicated Jung. He told the entire international psychoanalytic community to shun him.
It's exactly like a cult leader cutting off a defector.
That is precisely how it functioned. Overnight, Jung loses everything. His mentor, his father figure, his professional credibility, his friends.
Even the University of Zurich turned on him. He was completely isolated.
And this brings us to the first type of feeling lost. This is the loss of narrative.
The story of his life. I am the heir to Freud. I am the prince of psychoanalysis was just gone.
The script had been burned. And he didn't handle it with a stiff upper lip and a new business plan. He completely collapsed.
The details from the sources here are wild. I was reading about this period, and he essentially induced a psychosis.
He called it a creative illness, which is a very polite clinical way of saying he went voluntarily mad.
He started hearing voices.
He had apocalyptic visions of Europe drowning in rivers of blood, which, eerily enough, was right before the outbreak of World War I.
He would sit in his study and just let these terrifying, overwhelming fantasies wash over him.
But the part that really stuck with me, the visual that is so jarring, is his behavior outside the study.
Sure.
Here is a respected doctor, a grown man with a family, and he goes down to the lake shore.
Starts playing with rocks.
The pebble castles.
Yes.
He's out there building little villages out of stones, mud and sticks. He's constructing tiny churches and cottages by the water. If you saw your therapist doing that today, you'd call the licensing board. You'd think he's had a total psychotic break.
You absolutely would.
Yeah.
But Jung realized something profound during this. Something that, frankly, most of us completely miss when we hit rock bottom.
He realized that his adult self, the intellectual, the doctor, the heir to Freud, was a construct that had failed.
It was dead.
Exactly. That structure couldn't hold the truth of who he was anymore. To find out who he really was, he had to go back to the last time he actually felt authentic.
And for him, that was childhood.
That was being a boy, purely playing with blocks. So the regression wasn't a failure or a breakdown, it was a strategy.
It was an excavation.
Yes, he was bypassing his ego. By playing like a child, by engaging in what he later termed active imagination, he was lowering the rigid defenses of his conscious mind to let the unconscious bubble up.
He was inviting the madness in so he could actually organize it.
Precisely. He wrote down everything that came up in the Liber Novus, which is famously known as the Red Book.
I've seen pictures of it. That big, heavy, leather-bound book filled with the crazy, beautiful drawings. It looks exactly like an ancient medieval manuscript.
It does. And he worked on it for 16 years. That book is the literal record of him rebuilding his soul from scratch.
He painted his nightmares. He wrote out long dialogues with imaginary figures.
He didn't run from the void. He furnished it. He made a home inside the emptiness.
And this seems to be the crucial distinction, right? Most people, when they lose their job or their status or their marriage falls apart, they rush to fix it.
Instantly. We are terrified of the silence. We update the LinkedIn, we panic apply to jobs, we jump into a new relationship, we try to get back to normal as fast as humanly possible.
We treat the silence between chapters of our lives as an absolute emergency.
But Jung treated it as a workspace. He understood that you cannot build a new building until you have fully cleared the rubble of the old one.
Clearing the rubble. That is such a powerful way to look at feeling lost.
But clearing the rubble takes a lot of time. And to the outside world, it looks like you're doing nothing. It looks like you're just playing with rocks. But internally, it is the hardest work you will ever do.
But it requires a level of tolerance for suffering and ambiguity that most of us just don't have.
It does. It requires accepting that for a while, you will be nobody. You won't have a neat label to tell people at dinner parties. You will just be the crazy guy playing with rocks.
But out of that exact period came all his monumental concepts. The archetype, the collective unconscious, introversion and extroversion.
The Jung we know today, the genius, was born in that breakdown. If he had just patched things up with Freud, apologized, and played it safe, we never would have heard of him. He would have just been a footnote in Freud's biography.
So if you feel like your life's narrative has just completely shattered, the takeaway is, don't try to tape it back together. Let it break.
Let it stay broken for a minute. The feeling of being lost is just the signal that the old map is obsolete. You have to stop looking at the map and start looking at the territory, which is yourself. You are the blank page.
Now, Jung dealt with the void by going deeply internal. Our next subject, Theodore Roosevelt, tried to deal with his void by going entirely external.
And it almost killed him. Literally.
Oh, Teddy. The man who tried to outrun his own shadow. This story is the absolute perfect counterpoint to Jung. If Jung is the loss of narrative, Roosevelt represents the loss of validation.
The crash. And to truly understand the crash, you have to understand at the height from which he fell. Theodore Roosevelt wasn't just a president.
He was a force of nature.
He was the cowboy, the soldier, the police commissioner, the big game hunter, the prolific writer. The man got shot in the chest during a speech, paused, and finished the speech before getting medical attention.
He was undeniably the most famous man on the planet in the early 1900s. His entire identity was built on pure, unadulterated momentum.
Get action. That was his literal motto. Do things, be seen doing things.
He was completely addicted to relevance.
There's a famous quote about him from his daughter Alice, that he always wanted to be the bride at every wedding and the corpse at every funeral. He fed on the applause of the crowd. He needed to be the absolute center of gravity.
So flash forward to 1912. He's already been president. He willingly stepped down, but he's bored. He misses the juice. So he runs for a third term on the Bull Moose ticket.
And in his mind, this is just going to be a coronation. He expects the country to naturally rally around him. He's Teddy Roosevelt. The people love him. He's going to be on the currency.
But the reality check is brutal. The political machinery had moved on.
It had. He splits the Republican vote, Woodrow Wilson wins the presidency, and Roosevelt suffers a humiliating, crushing defeat.
It wasn't just a political loss. It was a deep personal rejection. He goes from being the center of American life to a historical footnote overnight.
It was a catastrophic identity crisis. He went from being the center of the world to being a private citizen sitting in Oyster Bay.
The phone stopped ringing.
The reporters stopped coming around. And for a narcissist, and I use that term clinically based on the psychological profiles we have, not as an insult, but as a personality structure, that silence is equal to death.
He measured his entire self-worth by the applause of others. When the applause stopped, he just felt empty. He fell completely into the comparison trap.
He was comparing his quiet present to his loud past. And to silence that unbearable emptiness, he declared war on himself.
Jung sits with the silence. Roosevelt attacks it.
He decides he needs to generate a new headline. He needs to do something so difficult, so undeniably heroic, that the world is forced to look at him again.
So at 55 years old, overweight, out of shape, and dealing with old injuries, he volunteers to chart an unmapped river in the Amazon basin.
The River of Doubt.
Which is such an appropriate name, it sounds made up.
It really does. And you have to realize, this wasn't a guided safari. This was a literal suicide mission. There were no maps. The local indigenous tribes actively avoided this river.
It was completely uncharted.
Full of piranhas, caimans, deadly rapids, and disease. There were no radios, no evacuation helicopters. If you got sick, you died. The only goal was to prove he was still worth remembering.
And the sources make it explicitly clear he wasn't doing this for science or geography.
No, he was doing it purely for ego. To silence the void. And he dragged his son Kermit along with him on this madness.
And the expedition was an absolute catastrophe from day one.
They lost their canoes in the rapids, they lost their supplies, they were starving, eventually eating monkeys just to survive. The jungle is relentless, and it does not care if you used to be the president.
And then Roosevelt gets hurt.
He gashes his leg deeply while trying to save a canoe from the rapids. In the jungle environment, the wound immediately gets infected. Then he contracts malaria.
He loses 50 pounds.
He's completely delirious, running 105-degree fever, lying in the mud in the middle of the Amazon. And there's this heartbreaking, incredibly revealing moment where he looks at his son Kermit and says, "Leave me."
He literally begged his son to leave him behind to die.
He had actually brought a lethal dose of morphine on the trip for this exact purpose. He told Kermit, "I am a burden. The expedition will fail if you carry me. Leave me here."
Because, in his own words, at least it would be a heroic death.
And I think, deep down, part of his ego desperately wanted that ending. Dying in the uncharted Amazon is a tragedy. Living as a washed-up, defeated politician is a comedy. He vastly preferred the tragedy.
That is profound. He would rather be a dead hero than a living has-been.
That is the ultimate danger of basing your identity on external metrics. Followers, promotions, wins, public approval.
When the tides turn, and they always invariably do if you live entirely by other standards, the loss doesn't just feel like a setback, it feels like a catastrophic erasure of the self.
Roosevelt's story is a massive warning sign. Don't let the silence of the crowd drive you to self-destruction.
If you can't be a nobody, you aren't really free. You're just a slave to the audience.
He survived, barely, only because Kermit absolutely refused to leave him and literally dragged him out of the jungle. But Roosevelt was never the same physically. The infection and disease shortened his life by a decade.
Because he couldn't sit still in a room alone and just be ordinary.
Exactly.
Which brings us to a very specific, almost uniquely high-altitude version of this exact problem. Roosevelt was lost because he lost. Our next subject was lost because he won.
The burden of the peak. This is the Buzz Aldrin story.
This one hits hard. It's so unrelatable on the surface because who among us is walking on the moon? But the underlying emotion is completely painfully universal.
It's the what now syndrome. It's the existential crisis of absolute completion.
Let's set it up. July 1969. Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong land on the lunar surface. They achieve what billions of humans across history could only dream of. They leave the planet.
They do the most significant thing a human being has ever done.
And then they come back. They are literal heroes. Ticker tape parades, medals from the president, global immortality. The whole world is chanting their names.
And then it's a random Tuesday in November.
The Tuesday after the parade. The post-moon crash.
You really have to try and imagine the psychology here. You are Buzz Aldrin. You are 39 years old.
39. That is so young to have peaked.
Exactly. You have achieved the absolute apex of human exploration. And you realize, with cold, terrifying certainty, that nothing you do for the rest of your natural life will ever matter as much as what you just did.
The core problem is that the moon wasn't just an accomplishment. It was the accomplishment.
There is no second act to walking on the moon.
Right. If you're a writer, you can always try to write a better book. If you're a businessman, you can launch a new product. But if you're an astronaut in 1970...
Mars is decades away, and NASA funding is actively being cut. You're done. You are essentially a living, breathing museum piece.
And he spiraled. Hard.
Deep clinical depression, severe alcoholism. His marriages fell apart. He blew through his finances.
And there is this vivid, almost cinematic image from the sources that just haunts me. A few years after walking on the lunar surface, Buzz Aldrin is working at a car dealership in Beverly Hills.
Selling used Cadillacs.
The man who piloted a spacecraft to another celestial body is trying to convince strangers to buy a car.
And he was terribly unsuccessful at it. He didn't sell a single car for 6 months.
What do you think that was?
Well, put yourself in his shoes. Imagine you are a customer, and you're complaining about the floor mats or haggling over a financing rate, and Buzz Aldrin is standing there looking at you thinking, I have seen the Earth rise over the lunar horizon. I have seen the infinite black void of space. Why on earth are we talking about floor mats?
He actually wrote in his memoir that Earth felt impossible to navigate because everything felt so incredibly small compared to the moon.
Because the scale was fundamentally broken for him. And this is vital for you, the listener, to understand. This is a biological issue, not just a psychological or spiritual one.
Break that down. The biology of achievement.
We are dopaminergic creatures. Our brains are biologically wired for the pursuit. The massive dopamine hit comes from the anticipation of the reward, the hunting of the mammoth, the striving toward the goal.
It doesn't come from eating the mammoth.
No, it comes from the chase. We need the prediction error, the exciting possibility that we might get something good. When the hunt is definitively over, and when no future hunt can possibly compare to it, the brain essentially stops producing the chemicals that make life feel meaningful.
It's a physiological crash.
Your brain literally says, nothing out there is worth the effort anymore. That manifests as severe depression. Aldrin didn't get lost because he was weak. He got lost because he had no affer. What's next?
This is what psychologists call the arrival fallacy, right? The dangerous idea that once I get there, I'll be happy forever.
And Aldrin got there more than anyone in the history of the species and found out it was just a rock covered in dust. And then he had to come back to traffic jams, taxes, and small talk.
This applies to so many people who aren't astronauts. Think about athletes retiring in their 30s.
Or soldiers coming home from a deployment.
Or a PhD student who spends 7 years writing a thesis, finally defends it, and then falls into a massive slump. Or the founder who sells their company for millions and then wakes up miserable.
The post-project blues. It's incredibly real. Aldrin's profound lesson is that you cannot live in the past tense. You cannot survive on old dopamine. You have to find a new mountain.
And the key here, and this is what Aldrin eventually figured out, is that the new mountain doesn't have to be higher than the last one.
It just has to be different. You have to switch games entirely.
Aldrin eventually got sober, and he became a massive, influential advocate for space policy and mental health awareness.
He stopped trying to be an astronaut and started being an advocate. He found a new why, but he had to completely let go of the moon first.
Jung went deep into the void. Roosevelt tried to go big and conquer it. Aldrin had to learn to go horizontal, to just find a different path.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it.
Now, I want to transition to our final historical figure, and this one is honestly my favorite because it is so painfully, hilariously ordinary. We've had psychosis, suicide missions in the jungle, and existential moon crashes. But this guy, he was paralyzed by a remarkably simple question.
The paradox of choice. The fog.
Enter Charles Darwin. It's 1838. He's a young man. He's recently back from his famous 5-year voyage on the HMS Beagle. He's starting to get recognized in scientific circles, and he's trying to figure out what to do with his life.
And being a very meticulous analytical scientist, he decides to make a literal pros and cons list.
The famous marry versus not marry list. It is quite possibly the most unromantic document in human history.
It's absolutely calculating. He approaches marriage like a geometry problem.
It's hilarious. He takes a scrap of paper, draws a line right down the middle, like a neurotic college student. Let's look at the prose side first.
Okay, so under marry, he writes things like, children if it please God, a constant companion, a friend in old age.
And then, the absolute kicker quote of the whole document.
Yes. He writes that a wife is, quote, an object to be beloved and played with better than a dog anyhow.
Better than a dog anyhow. Imagine putting that on a modern dating profile.
It's brutal, but it's authentically him. He's logically weighing the utility of a spouse against a pet. He's trying to optimize his future happiness with raw data.
But the cons side, the not marry column, is where you really see his anxiety. What was he so afraid of losing?
He wrote, freedom to go where one liked, choice of society and little of it, the loss of conversation of clever men at clubs.
And he noted he would be forced to visit relatives and bend in every trifle.
He was completely terrified of the domestic trap. He didn't want to be dragged to endless teas with the in-laws. He wanted to sit at the Athenaeum Club with the clever men and debate about worms and geology for hours. He wanted his absolute freedom.
He saw 2 very clear lives in front of him. Life A was the solitary genius, free, traveling the world, entirely unburdened. Life B was the cozy, domestic, slightly boring family man.
And here's the core issue that paralyzes him. Both of those lives looked good.
That's the modern dilemma, isn't it? It's not a choice between something obviously good and something obviously bad. It's a choice between good and good.
That is the exact definition of the paradox of choice. When you have too many good options, the act of choosing feels entirely like a loss.
Because the pain of giving up what could be heavily outweighs the benefit of what is.
Right. If Darwin picks the wife, he actively mourns the freedom. If he kicks the freedom, he mourns the companionship. So he just stood in the metaphorical hallway staring at the two doors, completely paralyzed by analysis.
Analysis paralysis. I feel this exact way every time I open a streaming app. There are way too many good shows, so I end up scrolling for an hour and watching absolutely nothing.
It's the exact same psychological mechanism, just scaled down. It's what I call the summer in Milan versus taxidermy in Japan dilemma.
Wait, what is that?
It's a thought experiment I use to explain this. Imagine you have a free summer. You can spend it in Milan, drinking incredible wine, falling in love, and seeing Renaissance art. Or you can spend the summer learning a highly niche, bizarre skill, like taxidermy in a master shop in Tokyo.
Okay, both sound very different.
But both would result in a really cool, interesting version of you. The problem is, you cannot be both people. To become the Milan you, you have to actively kill the Tokyo you.
That's dark. But it's incredibly accurate. Every choice we make is a death of an alternative timeline.
Exactly. Every commitment is a funeral for all the other possibilities. And Darwin was terrified of killing the solitary genius version of himself.
But, and this is the crucial takeaway from his story, he eventually realized that staying in the hallway means you don't actually live either life.
Staying in the hallway, keeping your options open forever, is actually the worst option of all. It guarantees you get nothing.
So how did he actually resolve the list?
He chose constraint. At the very bottom of the page, he emphatically scribbled, "Marry, marry, marry, QED."
QED. Like he had just solved a mathematical proof.
He essentially did, because he realized a profound truth. Constraint creates clarity.
Expand on that. How does limiting yourself create clarity?
By closing the door on the endless possibilities of the bachelor life, he actually enabled his life's work. He chose to marry his cousin, Emma Wedgwood, which, was quite common and accepted at the time.
Right, different era.
And that boring domestic life he was so afraid of, it gave him the exact routine, the safety, and the daily care he desperately needed to produce his masterworks.
Darwin was famously a massive hypochondriac, right? He was always sick or claiming to be sick.
He was practically bedridden for years. Emma took incredible care of him. She managed the household, she read to him, she even edited his scientific papers.
If he had stayed a bachelor, hopping from club to club to talk to clever men, he might never have had the deep, uninterrupted focus to write on the origin of species.
Exactly. The clever men at clubs would have completely distracted him. Freedom isn't just doing everything you want all the time. Real freedom is having the courage to say, I care deeply about this one thing, and therefore I actively choose not to care about all these other things.
A life in the boring routine created the stable container for his genius. He needed the walls. He needed limits to be able to go deep.
So the advice for the Darwin type of lost the person paralyzed by options is, pick a damn door.
Just pick a door.
Pick a door and walk through it. You cannot have everything. And trying to keep all your options open is actually a fast track to a meaningless life. Meaning comes directly from commitment, not from optionality.
Missing out is literally the price of admission for a meaningful life.
I really like that phrasing. That's exactly what it is.
So we've really been through the historical ringer here. We've looked at the void with Jung, the crash with Roosevelt, the cliff with Aldrin, and the fog with Darwin.
A very cheerful, uplifting tour of profound human misery, but a truly necessary one.
But it is hopeful, because in every single one of these cases, the quote-unquote lost phase was the absolute prerequisite for the found phase. The breakdown was the breakthrough.
That is the grand synthesis here. Let's actually try to build a practical playbook for the lost based on these 4 lives. If you are listening to this right now and you feel adrift, what do you actually do?
Step 1 seems to clearly be the Jung step.
Right. Step 1, stop running. If your life narrative breaks, do not immediately try to tape it back together. If you lose the job or the relationship ends, don't instantly fill the void with noise or new commitments.
Sit in it. Let the old self die. Engage with whatever comes up. Ask yourself, who am I when I'm not performing my usual role?
That is without a doubt the hardest part. Staring at the blank page of your own identity.
It is terrifying.
Yeah.
But if you skip that step, you're just building a new house on a completely rotten foundation.
Step 2 is the Darwin step.
Commit to constraint.
Once a new path appears to you, even if it's just a faint, uncertain trail, lock it in. Do not try to do 5 new things at once to hedge your bets. Do one thing. Actively close the other doors.
Focus is what gives you traction out of the mud. You need to purposely narrow your world to make it deep.
Exactly. Step 3 is what we can call the maintenance step. This comes from Roosevelt and Aldrin.
Watch your metrics. Avoid the comparison traps.
As you start walking this new path, do not compare your messy chapter 1 to someone else's polished chapter 20. That is the Roosevelt trap of needing external validation.
And crucially, do not compare your new quiet life to the peak of your old loud life. That is the Aldrin trap.
You have to be totally willing to be a beginner again. You have to be willing to sell used cars for a while. Metaphorically speaking, of course. You have to accept working on a much smaller stage.
Hopefully metaphorically. But yes, you have to accept the humble start without letting it crush your ego.
And finally, step 4, which brings us all the way back to the start. Back to the man catatonic in the bed in 1862. The Lincoln step. Yes, because sometimes there is no clever psychological trick. There is no brilliant reframe or paradigm shift. Sometimes the darkness is just incredibly heavy and the physical chemicals in your brain are actively working against you.
Lincoln didn't solve his depression in 1862. He didn't read a philosophy book and suddenly snap out of it.
No, he didn't have a sudden breakthrough and become a happy, joyful guy. He just put his feet on the cold floor. He put one sock on, then he put the other sock on. He consciously decided that even if he felt entirely dead inside, he had a massive job to do.
He literally led the country through its bloodiest, darkest hour while carrying that crushing internal weight.
He did, and many historical sources strongly suggest that his severe depression actually made him a much better leader.
How so?
It gave him profound empathy. It completely stripped away his ego. He wasn't trying to be a glorious, conquering hero like Roosevelt was. He was just desperately trying to survive and help the nation survive. His personal darkness deeply resonated with the nation's collective darkness.
So if you can't find the light at the end of the tunnel, just keep walking in the dark.
Just keep walking. The sun rises eventually. It's a law of physics. And sometimes you just have to endure the night and wait for the rotation of the earth.
This has been, wow, it's been heavy, but deeply good. I feel like I understand my own periods of confusion a bit better now.
It's necessary to talk about. We desperately need to normalize the downtime in human life. We need to stop treating feeling lost as being fundamentally broken.
So here's our final provocation for you, the listener, something to chew on after this is over. If you are feeling lost right now, I want you to stop beating yourself up. Stop asking, what is wrong with me? And start asking, what time is it?
That's a great way to frame it. What season of life are you actually in? Are you in the Jungian winter, where the old structures need to freeze and die? Or are you in the Darwinian spring, where you need to aggressively prune the branches to let one specific thing grow?
Diagnose your specific type of lost, and you'll start to find the map out of it. And remember to embrace the lack of a roadmap for a while.
And remember, even Abraham Lincoln couldn't get out of bed sometimes, and he did all right in the end.
He did all right.
Yeah.
Keep diving deep, everyone.
See you on the next one.